Unleash your inner mountaineer with these 5 essential tips for success on your next climbing adventure. Hey guys, welcome to the High Ground. My name is Fabio, and today's I'll bring you 5 tips for more success when you begin with mountaineering. Now, some words for me. I climb and hike and mountaineer since I was a little child. I'm from Switzerland. I did the Swiss mountain guide course. I had to bail because I got injured, but I will get back to it. On average, I'm spending more than 200 days per year in the mountains, and I'm sharing my experience with you. I already did a video with 5 tips for hiking, but mountaineering is a totally different animal. When we're talking about mountaineering, we're actually going above the tree line. We might be in glaciated area, and we have to consider a lot more things than if we're just out hiking. Of course, the tips I gave you for hiking are valid for mountaineering as well, so I will give you a link to the video below, but the tips you will get here are for the more advanced people who are really going into mountaineering. In this video, we will go over physical training and conditioning, proper gear and equipment, route planning and research, teamwork and communication, and last but not least, emergency skills and emergency planning. Let's start with physical training and conditioning. Physical training and conditioning is super important in mountaineering. Mountaineering can generally be somewhat of a grind. So it's likely that you're walking through snow, that you're not walking on paths, but that you're basically are going cross country over glaciers, over big rock fields, and a good physical condition that you're in is very important for that. The more we get into alpinism, where you're actually doing steeper routes, the more strength will be important. For pure mountaineering, I would recommend to have a heavy emphasis on endurance training. This is cardiovascular endurance, so basically the thing that we know as endurance, but also your muscular endurance. Make sure that your legs don't get tired while you're walking up those steep slopes. It won't help you a lot if you feel like you could go on forever, but your legs won't. So muscular endurance is often underrated. It's not often discussed, but it is very valuable. An easy way to train for muscular endurance, besides of running and actually doing a lot of hiking, is you can go on a stair machine. Get yourself a heavy backpack and just walk up steep slopes or the stair machine. You will notice if you feel that you can't go faster because you can't catch your breath, then the cardiovascular endurance is likely the problem. If you really feel that your legs are burning and you can't push faster because of that, then you have to train your muscular endurance in your legs. The second thing that you have to consider in the area of physical training and conditioning is altitude. So we're now in an area where we will get to higher altitudes, and it really depends on the person how quickly you will feel the changes. Some people already feel the altitude difference when they are on 2000 meters above sea level. I myself, for example, I always noticeably feel a change in my condition when I go above 3000 meters. That's roughly 9,000 feet, right? So check it out for yourself when you actually feel the change, and then be prepared for it, and of course acclimatize to the altitude. How do you do that? Well, it's fairly easy. You spend more time in the area. I always try to have I go up, exercise, and sleep low. But there are various different methods how you can actually acclimatize. It's not Super important if we're not talking about 8,000-meter peaks, but especially if you're in the higher areas in the Alps or in Northern America, so in the lower 48, then it makes sense that you really look at altitude acclimatization. The next thing that can make or break your mountaineering adventure is proper gear and equipment. Most people, especially in the beginning, tend to bring too much gear. Um, I always say people try to compensate lack of skill by bringing more gear. And up to a certain threshold, that's actually possible, but it is generally not the way or the route you should go down. Um, Make sure that you tried out your gear before you're actually in the mountains. So it has never hurt anybody to wear mountain boots for a day at home before they actually go out and wear them in the mountains for the first time. The same is true for backpacks and basically anything else. What I would recommend is that you actually do training laps on a somewhat lower mountain and wear your gear then. And then you will pretty quickly see what works for you and what doesn't work. And ultimately, lighter is better. Um, of course, if you bring more gear, then it might give you somewhat of a safety advantage, because if I have 5 jackets with me, I might stand up to a snowstorm longer than if I only have 2 jackets, right? Just because the insulation will be thicker. Um, but a heavy backpack makes mountaineering very unpleasant. The weight you carry with you is one of the main factors, not only for your safety, but also for how pleasant and what a good of an experience climbing a mountain actually is. Of course, that goes together with your endurance that we already discussed. And maybe keep one thing in mind. So you might feel at the beginning that a lot of gear is better because it provides you more safety margin. But the more gear you bring, the slower you are. And speed is also safety in the mountains. Now, route planning and research. I discussed route planning and research already in my hiking tutorial, but a few points that I would like you to take away from here, especially when we come to mountaineering. First of all, get a guidebook out of a series that you can really understand well. If you go through different guidebooks, really check out, hey, I really understand the route description in this guidebook, and I'm not clear at all what the guy in this guidebook means, right? So make sure that you know which guidebooks are suitable for you because you understand them. Especially for general mountaineering, you will get a lot of different books and a lot of different book series that have more or less the same maps in them. The descriptions are made in the same way. And it makes sense to use material and maps that you are used to. And another thing that I would recommend is have a fixed process how you do your route planning. That doesn't have to be always the same thing, but I know how I plan my climbs. I know how I plan mountaineerings. I know how I look at climbing a bigger north face, and I know how I look at um, doing a backcountry ski tour over 1 week versus over 1 day. So it makes sense to have a certain process there where you know, okay, if I run through this process, I have covered all my bases from objective hazards like avalanches, rockfall, over to the weather, over to the terrain, where do I get my food, etc. So it makes sense to have a fixed process in place and then stick to that process once it is established and tried. The fourth point is teamwork and communication. Now, a lot of people might hate me for that, and I know that especially in the beginning it can be hard. But I do not recommend to pick up somebody from the internet, from a forum, from a climbing portal, and go out and do a difficult route or a new route for you with them. Um, When I was younger, I was myself on forums and got climbing partners there. I did that once. Um, One of the guys that came with me back then, I'm still in contact with him today. The other guy was a total a-hole, and after that climb, I never wanted to see him again because he was such an idiot. And to illustrate that a little bit, he took a dump below a serac, right? So you had this big overhanging ice tower where everybody is basically running through, and he stopped there while we all were roped up and started taking a dump. So yeah, my recommendation, get to know people before you go into the mountains with them, especially if you feel that it might be a little bit on the edge of what you can do, right? It's good to be there because you want to push your limits, but it is much better if you have somebody with you whom you really trust. I mean, if I'm, for example, out with Guang, which is a very good friend of mine, I climb a lot with him, I not once worry that his belay will hold up if I follow him. And I not once worry that he has me secured when I lead a pitch. So that's really a good thing. And especially if you're out there for several weeks, right, doing really big things, you can get homesick. And it is really good if you have that emotional, personal connection and can really talk about anything. So that's my recommendation. Make sure that you're not only climbing partners, but it is good if you're also somewhat friends. Then communication. Um, there, my only advice is speak up. Because I often experienced that within a party of three people, all three people have a plan, but then they are actually out in the mountains, look up to the conditions and feel that this is really sketchy, right? And no one of the three people tries to say it. And as soon as the first one says, hey, can we discuss the condition of this wall? Should we really do that, right? The floodgates are open and everybody can bring up the concerns. And maybe if you think about the concerns together as a group, right, you might find ways to mitigate the risk and have a better and safer climb. So try to speak up. Don't be ashamed. Everybody gets scared in the mountains, or if you only have a bad feeling in your stomach, right? It doesn't have to be a rational thing. Just speak with the people you are with. If you don't trust them enough to do that, you shouldn't trust them with your life. Now for emergency preparedness and risk management. Now, you can't avoid risk, you can only manage risk. So I'm not one of the super safe, I have to equalize everything climbers. But I feel that handling risk in an appropriate way, managing risk, is the way to go in the mountains. Because the safest thing is to stay at home. What you should have, though, is a comprehensive emergency plan. Talk about the positions on your route and discuss, okay, as soon as we are over that edge, we might not have cell phone reception anymore. How do we alert search and rescue? If we are on the top of the mountain and one of us feels sick, feels altitude sick, what is the best way to go down? Maybe not back to where we came from, because that might be the more difficult way, but what is the quickest way to go down from each point on the route? Do I have the gear with me to not only go down the way I came up, but also to go down an emergency route? There we are at the point where we might need to bring more cordage to set up repelling points, right? So make sure that you consider all those circumstances when you make an emergency plan. And of course, also in this area, bring a proper first aid emergency kit with you. This does not only contain everything that you should have with you to stop the bleed. I mean, I think that especially in mountaineering, and also in mountaineering, stopping heavy bleeding is essential. So bring tourniquets with you. You might not necessarily need chest seals because it's not likely that somebody catches a bullet. But if people fall and they punctuate themselves with their ice axes or their crampons, it can bleed very heavily. I myself I hit myself in the face with my ice tool when a hold broke while I was dry tooling, and I had a big cut here, and I was bleeding like hell, right? Thank God we had some gauze, and I just put gauze on it, and everything was fine then, right? I put the bandage around it, and after dry tooling, I drove to the hospital and had it stitched up. But if we wouldn't have had gauze with us, then well, it would have been a mess to stop this bleeding. So bring a proper emergency kit with you, and as I said, not only for stop the bleed, but also bring stuff against diarrhea. You will likely not be able to get medicine against altitude sickness from your doctor because they're generally more heavily regulated. But if you have the possibility to bring something like that, right, that thins the blood, maybe something like that would make sense. Bring pain meds as far as they are allowed in the area where you live. So not only the accident care, but also care for sickness, especially if you're on a multi-day trip. Now, these were my 5 tips for anybody who wants to get into mountaineering and a little bit higher mountains. I hope they were interesting and helpful for you. If so, please give us a thumbs up. If you have any question or if you do something different, please give us a comment below. Remember to follow the channel. We post videos currently every Monday. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you next time.